Uh, not my visual novel, not my problem.
Always got to make me do this.
Only
Always
on
got.
your shit.
Yeah, usually I've read my shit like months before you got around to finishing it.
Look. The fact that I finished it at all is commendable.
Okay, so Great Ace Attorney Adventures are technically our second visual novel we've done as an off the shelf, though we did split up Mihoyo into like three parts, whereas we went into this one for Great Ace Attorney Adventures just all at once.
Honestly, it probably would have been more palatable to go adventure by adventure. I'm gonna be honest.
That's fair. That's honestly pretty fair. I'm not gonna
Maybe,
lie.
maybe not like one by one, but they some of these adventures could have been grouped into like the first two go together, and then like three and four go together, and then
And then
like
five is like two of them in terms of length.
so that one's on its own. Yeah, I think some creative splitting could have been done. And like
I'll say
I
this.
hesitate to say it, but like this probably would have come off better for me if we'd made this like a five-part series or something.
No, no, I actually think that's a fair observation. That's 100. But I think part of it is I didn't anticipate or I didn't know how you were going to respond to this, and also, while I had read the story before, this was my first time playing the game for myself because this was only freshly localized into English. Like this game has been around since the 3DS. This is only freshly localized into English, like in quarantine.
Well, let me tell you, the PC graphics are stunning for having been on the 3DS.
Oh yeah, like this is end of the 3DS's lifespan. 3DS. This is not Ace Attorney's never looked bad on the 3D. I'm not gonna lie. Ace Attorney at its biggest
Look,
issues on the 3DS have always just been the reuse of assets.
say what you will about any other part of this, and I'm going to have a lot to say about other parts of this, but the visuals were nice, very colorful, very polished. I was a big fan of a lot of the character designs too. Yeah.
So it might be a little controversial that we did Great Ace Attorney first. And in hindsight,
But I don't think it's controversial when you take into account me and my interests. This makes perfect sense as a starter.
yeah. No, I started you on this because I figured the Victorian setting was a lot more palatable for you than well, it's a Japanifornia setting, but it's a lot more true crime. So I don't know, maybe that would have been a little that also would have because it's not like you are not exposed to your average like true crime setting. So I
as
don't know.
someone as someone who was raised on pretty much an exclusive diet of American syndicated crime drama.
I don't know. Maybe I miss because you mentioned like during the very first stream you weren't sure how much the setting was actually doing for you. Like early on, I remember that. And maybe I just underestimated the flexibility of your setting preferences in terms of detective stories.
I don't know. The setting grew on me.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
I liked the setting more and more as we went on because I feel like the game did a very good job of incorporating kind of like little cast off elements that like you'd see and you'd be like, ah, yeah, that makes sense. But also, you look back and you're like, oh, yeah, that does. It fits with the setting, it fits with the time period, etc. And also, I did have I did have fun trying to pinpoint the exact like set of years that this takes place in because it's late, late Victorian into early Edwardian
I think
almost.
the setting
And
was sorry, go
there's
ahead.
like a sorry, there's like a set of there's like two treaties, which I think I mentioned this to you, but the game seems to take the names of two different treaties several years apart and mash them into one name. Um, and then kind of like include bits from both of them into one, but it was interesting, and I ended up looking up stuff because of it off stream after.
The game definitely does take creative liberties. Like this is not
Yeah.
supposed to be a one-to-one reflection of Victorian England.
Which is sad because I wanted to see Queen Victoria.
But
Why
the
couldn't I get to see Queen Victoria?
so the setting was definitely one reason I chose this one. The other reason was because it's got the newest graphics. It is the latest games in the series, more or less. So you have your 3D models, which it's not like the if we started like at the original series' starting point, they weren't going to look like Final Fantasy 1, nothing like that, but they were 2D sprites still. So it was more flat, a lot closer to say how Witch on the Holy Night looked. Except the artwork is still very we use this sprite. It has a lot more reused assets in for the old games. So
Guest on my audio track, Loki's sitting at the door screaming at me.
but I think if there's one area where I'm maybe regretful that I didn't start you on the original games is that when I chose this game, and even when I was playing it myself, I really didn't know or consider how long this game's cases are.
You know what? I suppose this is a good way to get into like how you play this game and stuff like that, and the length of the game because of that. But I feel like I made things a lot harder for myself initially when I first started streaming it, and then when I was trying to play it off stream on my own, because I thought the point of this was for me to genuinely try to like logic out the answers every time I was put forward with like a set of questions or people to press or something, and then only press once I was like mostly sure that I had the correct answer in mind, not like press on every single statement and wait for something to come up. So I think I spent a lot of time just like sitting and debating and going back over stuff and failing and having to try again.
When you
Um
probably didn't need to.
that I yeah, because like you know, from what you've told me, it seems like a lot of people play these games just click through every option until something hits.
Sometimes people purposely go out of their way to fail because there's some hilarious flavor dialogue in some fails.
Yeah, and also this is a long game.
Yeah.
And
Let me
it's
put
a
it
long game for 90% of it to be you just staring at a character's face that isn't doing anything while listening to dialogue.
look, you asked for a more like you said you wanted more gameplay than Mahoyo. This is about
I
as gameplay
did.
as it gets.
I did. This was more interesting than Mahoyo.
Yeah. Um
I'm about to
but
start
at
a
the same
war in our comments over
yes, you are.
that.
But I do think that this is coming down to the fact that you are just not a visual novel person.
No. I I think like okay, this is gonna sound really weird, but the closest thing that I can compare this to, right? Like the closest possible thing that I can compare the Great Ace Attorney to on DS, right? Where I'm going to do two comparisons, DS and PC. On DS, the closest thing I can compare this to is Imagine Figure Skater or the Chronicles of Narnia Prince Caspian game, right? Both of which are fairly heavy on like sitting and having to go through dialogue, but both also require me to like move around different places. Like in Imagine Figure Skater, you've got like all the mini games and stuff and so on, and optional stuff to kind of level up. Plus, it's actually quite a interesting game. But then in terms of like computer, I think the best comparison I have to this, and you're gonna hate me for the comparison, is actually Trade Winds
I'm not going to hate you.
because it's like
Trade Winds is at the end of the day a point and click adventure, which is like literally one step away from a visual novel.
yeah, and heavy dialogue with story, you know. Not that the story makes a whole ton of sense, but there is story and dialogue there. And I think but all three of those games have the added benefit of more active gameplay.
the point of you playing those games is the gameplay less so than the story. So it's not as egregious when the story doesn't need to be as complex, and when it is there, it's more a means to an end to get to the gameplay.
Yeah, so it
Whereas
like
like when you're looking at story-based games, you are a recent gamer, you are a gamer coming up in the very cinematic era. Your only completed game to this point is Baldur's Gate. When you're looking for a story in a video game,
Atelier Marie,
and it okay, yeah, Atelier Marie.
Atelier Marie.
There's Atelier Marie, but Atelier Marie is the early Atelier games, to my understanding, are still very like there is a story and it's a lot more prevalent than probably something like a Trade Winds or something like that. But it's more of a Zelda story where it's still it's more of a framing device for the gameplay still.
Yeah.
Whereas something like Baldur's Gate, while there is the gameplay there, let's be honest, the talk of the town is not D&D, it's the Baldur's Gate characters and story.
Mhm.
And you're used to having that very cinematically. If you're focusing on the story, it's a cinematic experience. It's a lot more it's a lot closer to watching a movie with gameplay.
Yeah.
Whereas visual novels as a medium came from and up in the era of video game design that Final Fantasy came up in, where there's a lot more of there's an actual term for it in game design too. I forget it off the top of my head, but it's like you're mentally filling in the gaps as you're reading. Like obviously, like in Final Fantasy, you're not a giant walking between little miniature houses. You're supposed to use that as a
Theater
supplement.
of the mind.
Exactly, exactly.
And the thing is, it's not that I'm not capable of theater of the mind. You know what I mean?
But that's
But
not something you've been looking for in your games, and that's not something you've necessarily been conditioned to look for in your game stories.
yeah, and the the because this is a game about being a lawyer, it's very procedural and it's set in this a lot of the similar places doing a lot of the same things over and over and over again, and like
So
it's fun to go through a trial once and kind of like argue against the jury. It's not so fun when you're doing it for the third time.
so again, I will come back. I will say Ace Attorney is a very asset reuse series. It came up on the GBA.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like it does not have the original like out when the series was first conceived, it did not have the ability to build its gameplay loop around a lot of individual assets and be able to have the presentation it did.
Yeah.
Um that's just not how visual novels could be done on the Game Boy Advance. Also, and then once you have the series started like that, that's what the fans are expecting out of the games. Um so I will say that, but
It
also
just
you did have a similar issue with Witch on the Holy Night, which arguably one of the less asset reusey visual novels compared to something like Ace Attorney. Like Ace
yeah.
Attorney makes Witch on the Holy Night look like every scene had unique artwork comparatively,
Yeah, that's true.
and
I
you did
think
have that same complaint.
yeah. I think I just and you know what the funny thing is? Let's take this back to one of my comparisons, Trade Winds, right? Trade Winds has one map and one image for every city. Arguably, Trade Winds has far less actual images than this. But
But it's not asking you to engage with the story nearly as much.
yeah,
Whereas here,
yeah,
it is that this game isn't visual novels aren't taking the full leg and mile to try immersing you into the story on a visual experience. Not normally. Not outside of like random, like not random, but like the occasional scene in like Witch on the Holy Night where suddenly the budget pops off and it looks practically animated.
yeah. That was nice.
Like that's just the nature of visual novels, and I think my theory is that that's where the disconnect is primarily. It's not that you can't read as much as I've joked about that. I love making that joke. I almost did order that K through 6 reader.
I would have actually thrown it at you. Like genuinely. I probably would have actually chucked it at you because as funny as that joke is, every so often, it does get grating after a while.
I made the joke twice.
You've made the joke like 10 times.
No, I've made the can't read joke 10 times, but that's just because that's what the Fate fan base does. And I'm teasing you. I'm also kind of teasing the Fate fan base about their Learn to read if you don't want to start Fate Stay Night on the visual novel.
It's not that I can't read. I just prefer to read good things.
Okay, now that I'm not protecting you on. I'll protect you all day on your preference not to read visual novels. I'm not gonna protect you on that part there.
Look, what can I say? Herlock Sholmes was not impressive and continued to be not impressive for 5 more fucking cases. Why? Why is a little pink-haired girl somehow the best character in this story? Why is Wilson the best thing that this franchise has created?
Well, you've only played the one game. Like, let me tell you,
I
there are characters. The best thing this franchise ever created was probably named Miles Edgeworth, but that's not a character you get to see.
Look, I will die on the hill that the only two characters of note in this entire game were Zeke's and Wilson. I will die on that hill. They are the only two I cared about.
Okay, like we complain about asset reuse, but come on. Don't tell me it doesn't always catch you off guard when he suddenly throws his entire leg on the table.
The wine glass.
I love Zeke's animations. Zeke's is just such a like he's such an asshole.
I love him. I love him so much. I can't even express the level at which I love him.
The Ace Attorney prosecutors are always considered like the highlights of their games usually. Usually.
On that note, controversial opinion here. Susato can take a long walk off a short fucking cliff.
Spicy take.
I have no nice things to say about her.
Look, she's not the companion I read through. This is an entirely new experience reading through this. So like I might disagree, but it ain't hills I'm gonna die on. You go off.
I hate her. I hate her with a burning passion. I hate the way that she acts. I hate the way that she talks. I hate the way that she behaves. And if she fucking throws me one more time, I'm gonna reach through the screen and I'm gonna find a way to fucking suplex her pixels. I will learn to code just to suplex her back. IRL. I fucking hate her. Cause she like all she ever does is jump to conclusions, fangirl over Mr. Useless, and just be completely unhelpful. Like anything she does, I could do better without her input. My God, I hate her. Sorry, that was my thoughts on Susato.
No. I don't really have a response, but look, I'm not gonna tell you not to decry physical abuse.
I
Maybe I'm
just,
a little bit desensitized to that in the series because like let me say I'm used to being literally whipped in the courtroom and having coffee thrown at my face.
that's Phoenix Wright, right? That's
Yup.
that era.
Yup.
Here's the
That
thing. I see Phoenix Wright all the time on things because like I've heard you talk about Phoenix Wright before and I remember all the memes that you've showed me and I've seen the little like the stupid jokes or something and Phoenix Wright has infected my feed so much that I recently got a notification from Good Smile that they have right now the um cloth clothing Phoenix Wright is on reissue right now for a cheaper price than was originally released. So like
honestly, I'm not gonna lie. Like in hindsight, I should have just started you on Phoenix Wright's game because I brought up earlier the cases are really long here. They're not long in Phoenix's first game. In fact, the
I
only case that even comes anywhere near the length of the cases, like cases 3 through 5, is the final case, which was added much later, like as a DLC kind of deal.
Yeah, I really underestimated the length of some of the later cases, I think. I mean, obviously, I think you could tell that from like my responses to the stream and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But like I really did not think that they were gonna like take the length of like the first two cases and then go, all right, so for case like 4 and 5, let's just make them 5 times the length
Let me put it
of
this way.
every other case.
It took you like 3 or 4 streams to finish case one.
Granted, that was because the first one I just kept fucking up on mechanics and had to
Ace
restart
Attorney,
three
the original Ace
times.
Attorney game, I probably could have finished, like, you probably could have finished the original Ace Attorney case one in like 20 to 40 minutes. And case
Mm.
two, you probably could have finished within that same stream if it was a little bit of a longer stream.
But then I wouldn't have gotten to see the mysterious lady in the angry bird hat.
That's kind of the other reason I'm a little like maybe I shouldn't have started you here. Because originally the idea was, oh, it'll be like Mahoya. We'll do this one and then we'll have a part two because it's a duology. It's easy. I don't think I'm going to take you to part two. You weren't really that engaged with the story itself. You don't like a lot of the characters. And I think the only thing you're really like, what the hell happened there is that lady in the bird hat.
Wait, is the second half a separate game?
It's in the same collection. Like if you boot up the collection right now, it's literally in the, like you just select the other game.
Would that be would that be like the memoirs of the Clouded Kokoro set?
I don't think so. I'm going to triple check that, but I don't think so. It's like a separate game.
Because there was Adventures and then there was Resolve, right? And I was
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's
okay.
Adventures and Resolve. You only played Adventures. Resolve is the second half. But the Resolve has another set of cases. You did 5 cases, just 5 cases, right? 5 cases, and then a bunch of little mini vignette episodes.
No,
Did you go back to Japan, like for a full trial?
I played all of the cases because I thought when you said there were other stuff, I thought you meant the other set of 5 cases too.
That's like another 30, 40 hours. There's no way you played those.
I thought you meant both sets.
I haven't played the other set yet. You
Nick
could
Nack,
start.
I've been working on this for 2 weeks. Why do you think I asked for more time? You said that there were the 5 cases and then there were the other ones. When I finished with the 5 and the vignettes, which I did not regard as separate things, I moved on to the other set of cases, like memoirs of a clouded kokoro, because there was the first one was I thought it was a sequel because you had the adventure of the clouded kokoro and then there was memoirs of the clouded kokoro. That was the second case in the second set. I thought they were all part of the same. I thought I was supposed to play them all. That's why I said you should have divided this up.
Well, we're going to cut ourselves off at those first 5 cases as far as story discussion goes. And I guess we are doing the second half as an off the shelf. Come back in 3 months, maybe?
I could have had this filmed 2 weeks ago. I could have finished this 2 weeks ago.
Objection.
I I didn't. Fuck.
So you actually got to play the story to its conclusion. Like you did not cut off when Susato leaves on the boat.
No! I thought I was supposed to follow it. Well, I think we've learned a very important lesson here, and that's that Seki needs very specific instructions.
That or
When,
I need to give those instructions to you every month we're working on a project like this.
look,
I gave you the instructions of just resolve, but that was like 6 months ago.
well, you'll be happy to know I like the second set of cases better.
That's what I've heard. I've heard the second set are better. I have my problems with the first set. Oh, this is awkward.
look, you know what this means? This just means that you got me to play even more Ace Attorney than you thought you would. Congrats.
Now I want to make you play Phoenix Wright for punishment. God damn it.
So I guess that means I can't discuss the second set of five.
No, we're stuck to the first set. The story ends
Okay.
when Susato leaves on a boat.
Okay. The Boat.
Boat.
Oh, I will say I did kind of flick in and out of like activating sound while I was playing the game.
That's fair.
Um,
The ticking sound got on your nerves very early on, I remember.
oh, it really did. And like I activated sound so I could hear like the objection a few
That's the problem
times,
is,
but like,
and I kind of agree with that complaint that the ticking sound should be its own separate slider.
mm-hmm,
Because I like it as like a fan of the old games, and it really does fit on like the old DS like things when you have a, but it's a little bit jarring to hear the same like pixelated ticking sound in the modern games. I will admit that.
yeah.
And I can see how that got on your nerves, and they should have an option to slide that off so you can still hear objection and the desk slams because you got to hear the sound of Baron Van Zeke's leg hitting the desk.
I heard them a couple times and I was like, I think that's enough, you know? Like it doesn't
I mean,
need.
you played the rest of your streams with them after the first stream, so you at least played through like a full more or less two trials with it because you did restart the first trial after that first stream.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had them activated for streams, but pretty much after I stopped streaming the game, I just turned the sound off. And I'm gonna be honest, I made better progress when I just like put a podcast on my other screen and just went at it. I'm used to doing things with background noise, so background noise helps me focus in.
Look, I get it, but I will say, no, I get it. I do get it. I know how your ADHD brain works. I know that's how you read books too.
Yeah.
Um, but we do have a very visual novel loving audience. So some of them, and I've actually talked about this on stream when they asked about this. I know some of them, and I put emphasis, I like this as well, but I know this isn't you. Some of them would be like, that's part of the visual novel experience, though, is the fact that you also have the soundtracks and sound effects going. So there's like a almost a film level sound design thing going on too that you get with games. I get it that it's not how you read, but that is a huge thing for a lot of visual novel fans. And yeah, I'm not going to be like harsh on you about that because I know.
I get it to a certain extent. With Witch on the Holy Night, I will say though, like for example, with Witch on the Holy Night, I certainly appreciate the soundtrack more separated and in music files like I have because I actually have listened to those music files, for the purposes of like picking songs to use like when I'm editing and stuff. Because for the off the shelves, I use exclusively Witch on the Holy Night music for the intro outros.
I don't.
Um,
It's come up in like anime club discussions before that you don't you're not particularly one for soundtrack normally. Like there's exceptions like
no,
Suzume,
yeah.
but like you aren't you that's just not something you normally look for when you're consuming really any visual medium.
And like it doesn't like we talked about like how theater of the mind is kind of like intended in this, but
Mm-hmm.
like as someone who is sort of like a very intense reader, right? It's not that I don't have the ability to do things like in terms of like theater of the mind because I have the imagination brain, right? Like I see pictures rather than words when I think Jesus. When I think of things, right? And like for example, with like the case of Hamefura, right? I pictured that entire fucking second season of anime in my head that didn't exist as like a fully cognized anime off of just reading the manga. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Or like when I read books, like I can absolutely see what's happening in my head.
And I don't
And for me, like often when I'm reading, it does, and it's not always a podcast. Sometimes I just put on like different like music, right? and it's pretty loud. Like when I put on music to sit down and read things, it's often like on headphones or like significantly loud, so it kind of the music and the podcast sort of act as like a barrier to anything outside of what I'm doing, almost like because then I don't have other noises coming in over the music. And that's not to say that I always put on music, and there are certainly I am certainly capable of like, going so deep into a story that I wouldn't even notice if someone screamed right next to me, right? But this is not the sort of thing that would pull me in to the point where I'm like hyper
Well,
focused in on it.
this is where I'd be like, this is probably a very weird middle ground for you, isn't it? Because normally, if you're doing theater of the mind, that is what you're doing. Here, there is still that visual element that's being asked to be interpolated. It's more of an interpolation than a straight theater of the mind thing.
I'm gonna be honest, the roughest parts of this were the ones where there were multiple, during trials when there were multiple people on the stand and someone would be talking, and then I had to shift who I was looking at with the keys to see someone else giving a reaction that I then had to press. That was the worst of it because, like, when I'm reading, right, you would normally read that as something like, as you heard him, like, answer the question and stutter, something caught your eye slightly to your left and you saw the stunned face of someone else, right? But like having to like kind of break myself out of like reading and listening to the story to like button over to the left or the right to just see someone making the most horrendous face. What?
Look, look, I'm sorry. This is 100% the consequences of your own actions. You know why?
Why?
Because every single time that happens, a very obvious and loud sound effect plays from that character.
Uh, but I had the sound on a few times when that happened and I don't remember that.
Usually it's like like they'll do something like that, and that's supposed to be your cue that they're reacting to a statement. There's maybe one time they don't do that, but then it's like really obvious, like just looking at the screen, like on the same person.
Yeah, but I feel like that definitely happened. Like one of the groups of people did that in the third trial when I was streaming it, and I don't remember that happening at all.
That happened every time except for maybe one. I think there's once in the final trial that doesn't happen, but otherwise that happened every other time.
Then I just didn't notice it even when I had the sound on. The other thing is normally when I'm reading, was it selective sense activation? Often when I'm focused on trying to read something, it's to the exclusion of actually understanding things I'm hearing or smelling or feeling per se. Like I think often when I'm reading, I tend to hyper focus on just the reading, and other like sensory perceptions can kind of, which
And
is
here's
probably why sound design isn't so effective for me because I'm so focused on the visual that the sound just kind of.
here's something you missed. Like I know for a fact you missed because it's like really tied to the soundtrack, and it's like a pretty obvious thing if you're listening for it. In the story, in that first trial, there is a completely different theme that plays whenever Naruhodo objects to a statement than every other trial. The other trial, the theme that plays at the end of his first trial when he starts to gain confidence. Like they actually have a leitmotif theme going in that trial, and you would not catch that
Nope.
thematically. And that's the kind of audio cue you get from like anime movies that carries over into games and visual novels.
I just don't.
Yeah. Like
I've
it's a different language. I think that's the thing is this is just a completely different language of experiencing stories.
Yeah, I've talked about it before, but this is also one of the reasons why I don't do well with audiobooks. I'm incapable of tolerating audiobooks, and it's one of the reasons why I hate so many books that I had to read in school was because teachers would often make us read out loud, and I cannot stand having to listen to other people read out loud when the book is in front of me.
Yeah, I mean, it's
So I'm kind of glad I didn't have to listen to voice acting in this game per se most of the time, because if I had that I would not have gotten through as many streams as I did, because I would have genuinely just been tabbing through as soon as I finished reading it visually, and it would have the characters would have gotten cut off in like the at like the third word of any given sentence.
I mean, that's just how it is with voice acted games sometimes. Even I actually do that too.
Yeah.
When I'm playing a lot of voice acted games, I get that when you like I can do voice acting if it's like a very cinematic voice acting or if it's not like so obviously like text boxes, but I can't on a
I mean, hell, I do
game like
that
Ace
to
Attorney.
fucking Witcher sometimes. Because I realize, and before I realize it, is I'll click the spacebar because I've finished reading, but Geralt has not finished saying whatever he's supposed to be saying, and I'm like, oh, whoops, should have let that play out. I do it in Baldur's Gate too. I mean, it's not just because I don't particularly love this game. I do it to games I love too.
Yeah, no. I
It's just rough.
you'll hear no criticism on that from me. Like,
I did want to bring up something. So you mentioned, yeah, okay. I'm gonna call back to a lot earlier in our discussion, but you mentioned the whole like, by the time that this game was made, the fans kind of wanted to stick with like certain, the fans like knew what the game looked like and how it behaved, and so they didn't really change a whole lot of it. Um, I present you with the Atelier series, which did in fact at one point completely change the way that those games worked. Like they took a big risk, but they did, and it worked out.
so
So they could have changed the way that Ace Attorney games worked.
so I'm gonna counter you on this with the fucking Final Fantasy series. Look, there's some you don't want to just change a genre on a fan base because it creates a problem where the fan base is no longer the series loses its identity when you change the genre and gameplay altogether. Ace Attorney has changed between the games. This game is actually very different than how the original Ace Attorney plays. There's a lot more bells and whistles that the original Ace Attorney games just didn't have, like the cross-examining multiple witnesses. Original Ace Attorney was always only ever one witness at a time, outside of like maybe a rare occasion that something weird happens.
Mhm.
And there is no jury. Like the jury system is just not in the original series.
Okay, but the jury system was the best part of this.
That is a
Like,
brand new thing.
objectively, the jury system was definitely the best part of this game. Especially the ability to like pit them pit them against one another like fucking pit fighters in a ring. God, that was hilarious.
This game is like the final form of Ace Attorney.
Hmm.
And games as you go farther back are a little bit more and more simple, mostly speaking.
A new Ace Attorney game just came out recently, right?
No.
No?
So the game you're thinking about is Ace Attorney Investigations Collections. That
Yeah.
is a spin-off of the original series that was also on the DS. They've basically been on a
Okay.
crusade to port and localize every Ace Attorney game to modern consoles. Like the two games that you played, even though you should have only played the one, were originally not brought to the West because of issues around Sherlock Holmes's rights and the litigiousness of the Doyle estate. Um, and the one of the two games that just got released in that investigations collection was not released because of bad timing with the DS and low sales.
I'm about to make a real controversial statement here. Um, Sherlock Holmes is not any worse for the perception of Sherlock Holmes than the fucking BBC Sherlock show with Benedict Cumberbatch.
Sherlock Holmes is a very flexible character. He's treated a lot as a public domain figure in terms of interpretations of him,
I
but
know. I
the
know, but
Doyle estate, the Doyle estate is particularly protective of especially later tellings of Sherlock Holmes, like Hound of the Baskerville, which does come up
yeah,
in this story.
but I feel like I'm just like for a given value of like how you're representing Sherlock Holmes, this is not any worse for his reputation as a character than the entirety of the BBC Sherlock show,
Look,
which is going
Sherlock
to get me absolutely murdered by every fan of BBC Sherlock. But as someone who watched BBC Sherlock, this is not worse.
Sherlock Holmes was like, although it's kind of funny, like, haha, this is like a complete like fuckery around the character of Sherlock Holmes, so he's Sherlock Holmes. He was Sherlock Holmes in the original Japanese version. Sherlock Holmes is a localized name to fight to avoid legal problems,
Yeah, yeah.
and also a reference to how arson the Arsène Lupin the series that book series
Yeah.
got around it.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, on, back to where we were, which was on the topic of soundtrack. Yeah, no. Even if I was listening to the soundtrack, I would have missed smaller cues like that. I think I probably would have noticed them if I had just listened to the soundtrack separately with no visuals. But when visuals are presented to me, I'm not typically able to focus on both an audio and a visual input.
And the thing is, you probably wouldn't catch it though, because a lot
Yeah.
of those moments are like the use of this song in this specific moment is supposed to communicate something. You don't necessarily
Well,
get that. Like, you can get the in it like the
yeah.
emotions the song is trying to convey listening to the soundtrack. I love
Yeah.
listening to soundtracks, but like sometimes if you listen to it on its own, it's a little bit like, oh, you have to make presumptions about how they're used. Like you go back to the
Mm.
Witch on the Holy Night soundtrack, you could find a lot of themes that are just remixes of the same song,
Yeah.
which is something you're probably used to in say like a musical. Like if you go listen to Les Mis, you'll catch that, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I do like listening to musicals and I love listening to soundtracks and like, but I do a lot of that without visuals. Um,
So
which
this
is better for me.
it's a similar experience, but it's doing all that at once. It's visuals, gameplay, and story
Yeah.
at the same time, give or take on the gameplay element depending on the visual novel.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't want to say it's like, because it's not that it's too much for me. It's just that,
Not what you're used to.
yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
not necessarily how you've it's not necessarily how you've hardwired your brain in terms of consuming things, because you have a particular way of reading that works really well for you, and you read a lot, and you know how to like theater of the mind it very well doing that.
Yeah.
And you're a fast, like, jokes aside, you are a faster and better reader than I am by a long shot.
Yeah. Although what that has done for like the amount and quality of things that I consume has not always been positive. I think the problem with reading as much as I do is that at a certain point you run out of traditionally published things that are interesting and good quality, and you have to get into non-traditional publishing.
Fan fiction,
Yeah. Or you have to be willing to take a quality decrease to fulfill the requirements,
bodice rippers.
or yeah. Yeah.
Don't worry, don't worry. That's look. A lot of visual novel series started off as porn, so
Look,
you
I can
know.
appreciate that. I really can appreciate that. As like someone who did read like those like, 4.99, 5.99 pocketbook bodice rippers that you can buy at like airports. As someone who like does read those occasionally when like I need something to read and it's like what's available. Oh yeah.
Well, they're a dime a dozen. I'm sure there's the occasional bodice ripper that's like, oh yeah, this could have just been actually published as a book.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that would be the Fate Stay Night of their genre. Like this is just an actual story, and you only put this there to increase sales and to get it published because they might not publish it otherwise.
Yeah. Um what I will say about this game is that I actually preferred the latter couple trials to the first two. I understand that the first two were almost like kind of bit by bit teaching me how to play the game, but they were a little bit annoying because of that, I think. I think I'm a little bit more used to just throwing myself once again in the way that I have trained myself to play games. I am more used to just kind of dropping myself into the deep end and then figuring out as I go. And so being led through like an extremely lengthy and particular almost tutorial, but not quite, is not particularly attention holding for me. So once we moved to on to like 3, 4, 5, where a lot of the time I was allowed to just do what I wanted, without being told like 15 different rules about a new mechanic. That was much better to go through in terms of like just story and experience. I mean,
I will ask,
uh,
was the second game, even though we're not talking about the second game, was the second game generally better about that for you in the
a
earlier trials for that
little,
game?
a
Yeah,
little, yeah,
and I think that's where this is a little bit rough because this is a soft reboot of the series, so
yeah,
it
yeah,
did need to. And it had more new mechanics that were just not in the original game. So it did spend a lot more time for both being a soft reboot and having new mechanics explaining stuff. I actually don't care for so you want me to start getting into where my criticisms are as a longtime fan?
yeah, sure.
I don't care for this story. Like I've been defending the visual novel medium, and I'll defend the Ace Attorney gameplay to high hell and back. But
Well,
this,
you don't
and I like the
approve of him sneaking himself onto a ship and traveling halfway across the world to a different country. What like having to live through his best friend be murdered and be accused of said murder, and then verbally and ineffectively bully his way into becoming an unqualified British lawyer?
okay, that's the kind of bullshit I'm used to with Ace Attorney. My problem is in entirely and for once you get to hear this criticism in a series that isn't something you submit. It's pacing. I can't stand the pacing of this game. It is like back like, oh, get done with one trial. A few days later on the boat. A few days later or a few months later, but it's like they're back to back pacing, and then suddenly the final trial is, oh yeah, there's a time skip, and we're supposed to assume that now they've gotten used to living in London. Like, no, give me a couple more trials while we're in London. I don't believe that these people have this like repertoire with Herlock Sholmes and Iris Wilson, because I haven't seen them live together. They literally just moved in at the end of the last case. And in other games, for the trial sections, it's not like one long trial section. The way the other games work is you have like the investigation section, which you saw in the later cases during the second case,
Yeah, because
where
like the first case was how to trial, the second case was how to investigate, and then the third case was
all
jury
trial
mechanics and like
and jury
all,
mechanics,
yeah. The third case was like put it all together and add jury mechanics.
but
And
no
then
investigation.
yeah. And then 4 and 5 were like you now have the equipment. Do
Long
as you like.
investigation, long trial, long investigation, long trial.
Yeah.
It's very segregated. In the original series, it would go, you have the tutorial trial, and that's the only, not always the only one, but usually there's like only a handful of trials that are just trial, and usually the tutorial.
Mhm.
And then you would move on to like the bulk of the game, which is like you have an investigation that introduces the conflict in the story. Day one of a trial, you then go back to investigation, and then they were shorter split up trials, even if the case was longer. So it means that the trial sections in this game end up feeling a lot more tiring to play through, in my opinion. In the investigation sections, oh, I'm gonna be honest, I've never cared for Ace Attorney investigation sections all that much in the main series, but uh, it's just Great Ace Attorney 1 to play through and read through as a longtime Ace Attorney fan is kind of tiring. I definitely enjoyed the characters a lot more than Seki did. Because I love how stupid Herlock Sholmes is, and I'm used to far more abusive people than Susato. For the first game at least, I thought Van Zeeks, while he's funny, didn't have a lot of depth to him outside of being kind of racist.
Damn.
And Naruhodo,
Is
I
an
feel like
idiot.
his entire character is just,
He's
my
an
best
idiot.
friend and I were an idiot, and my best friend got killed. I'm gonna live up to him. That's all he does for that entire first game.
He's a fucking idiot.
So
Um
I don't have a lot of strong feelings about those two, but like otherwise, I find most of the cast at least charming, even if they don't have a lot of depth. It's just the pacing of the gameplay and story that really fucks with me reading this one. It took me a lot longer than it usually would for Ace Attorney.
I think I will say the thing I hate most about the gameplay is that sometimes when you're going through a trial and investigation, right? Like for example, trial number 3, right? So I'm inspecting the carriage, right? The first time. I inspect the carriage, I find the things I'm supposed to find, right? And then 20 minutes later, I'm sent to inspect the carriage again, and I'm like, but I've already been through here, right? No, something new has unlocked, right? I, I this sounds so counterintuitive, but I almost wish that you could like when being told to investigate something like the doctor's report, right, from like the first trial or the carriage from the third trial, I wish that you could point out like because there were a few times where I like open, flip over, turn around, like did all the things and only found one thing. But then like the next time we come back to it, less than a couple minutes later, it's like, oh, maybe you should turn it around and there's something new. I kind of wish that if you put the time in to examine absolutely everything, you should be given all the clues to start with because it would facilitate the pacing of getting through things to move a little faster if you just spend that like extra 30 seconds when investigating the piece of evidence on like the three-dimensional turn screen and clicking, and then it's there for you, and then what you have to do is put it all together in the correct order
So I'll
rather
defend
than kind of being led piece by piece to finding things, which feels like I'm being spoon-fed an answer.
well, in some ways you are, because it's at the end of the day, it is a linear visual novel still. And it would
I know, but I wouldn't mind being spoon fed it so much if I didn't have to keep going back and looking at the goddamn carriage in between every single set of testimony because they've decided there's some. Like, just let me see all the things at once. Then you can lead me to it in a linear fashion, but just let me see them all at once.
well, I'll defend the carriage actually, because that's actually a pretty damn important part of the
Okay,
story,
yeah.
where
Well,
it's like
yes,
they literally tampered with the evidence and it's supposed to be like, oh, how honest
yeah.
are you being here?
Okay, outside of that
Yeah,
though,
yeah,
there were a few other things that the tampering was irrelevant.
yeah. I, I can kind of get that. I can kind of get that. I do think that sometimes Ace Attorney can get a bit roundabout, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, sometimes you figure things out way before the game wants you to. And it's like, oh, sometimes this actively hinders it because now I'm pushing towards this answer and the game doesn't think I should be pushing for this yet.
The way that in the first fucking trial that happened to me, where I was like, I knew what happened, and I was just like, okay, but there should be blood here, and there was no blood there, and then I played through 5 more lines of dialogue, and then there was fucking blood there.
I think the problem is, and this is something I think a lot of people, like everyone, and this is, I'm not going to discount your critique of this because I've heard that critique of the series before. Um, Ace Attorney isn't you trying to figure out a mystery. It's the game throwing individual small logic puzzles at you that you're supposed to figure out on an individual basis that are strung together by a story. But if you approach it trying to figure out the mystery ahead of time, it often fucks with how you're trying to go about that process. And I do think that's something the Ace Attorney series as a whole struggles with.
It's, and I think it's interesting because I do actually have a point of reference here. Because I've played the Nancy Drew mystery games and the Hercule Poirot mystery games, like the computer mystery games. And neither one has that same problem. They're both on the whole more enjoyable, but also the focus in those is solving the overall mystery rather than putting together a linear set of like instructions and clues. And I suppose there, like, the benefit is also there's not really a trial component in those games. It's focused on like the investigation, and once you know what's happened, you kind of just.
I think this is actually something lost with Greatest Attorney over the original series. In the original series, it's made very clear from both the first couple trials, this is not a mystery of who done it, but how done it. So you're trying to piece together how done it, and you're trying to explain how done it more or less.
Mhm.
In this game, not a single one of the cases tells you, like in the other games, like you literally get told who did it right off the bat. This game, not a single one of the cases tries to ease you into that. You are not told who was responsible for killing Dr. Wilson on that first trial. You're not told. It might be. You're not told who killed Asogi. You're not told who stabbed what's her name in the back. You don't get told the answer, so it conditions you to be looking for who done it, which in Ace Attorney is often obvious because Ace Attorney is not afraid to write very tropey, because in order to like create more identifiable and visually and often personality entertaining characters, but it does lead to you figuring things out way faster. And I do agree that is a problem of this game particularly.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those things where I'm kind of like, well, it's not ideal, you know. But on the note of you bringing up actually the fourth case. So how about that window tax mention?
Why did I know that would be one of your favorite things mentioned in this entire game? When I decided to do this game, that was what I was thinking of. Was the
Because
fucking
it's a
like obscure ass window tax thing.
because it's a genuine thing. The window tax is fascinating is that hundreds of landlords, all like you can still see evidence of this in London today, is that hundreds of landlords all over London literally went and bricked up like every other window in their house because their houses were taxed on how many windows faced the street.
Can I assume that was probably your favorite case because it's the one that played the most with the Victorian setting?
Well, also bookstores, so yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the only thing that could have made it better would be a mention of the speckled moth.
Look, I as far as like filler cases go, I actually think that case is a bit stronger than like usually Ace Attorney. The way it's structured is like the first couple cases are either relevant or important character wise, and the final case is relevant. But like there's a middle one or two case where it's like, did we really need to tell this story? That was this case for this game, but also I figured you would like it a lot because it did play a lot with London society.
I almost want to say that I think I would have liked this game better on the whole if Naruhodo's friend, Ryunosuke? No, that's his
No,
first
Ryunosuke
name.
is Naruhodo.
Yeah, what's his friend's name?
Uh, Asogi?
Yeah, Asogi. If Asogi had actually made it to London with them and then died at some point in London, I think would have made this a little bit more palatable for me because I feel like we got introduced to this character who was actually kind of interesting and we learned very little about him and then he got killed, but like
I I kind of agree actually. I do like there are parts I like about the boat investigation, but I do kind of find it like it feels like it kills the flow that there is like it kills the flow and it makes Asogi's death feel very unceremonious because there's no
yeah.
trial, which is like the point of this game is like the highlight of these games
Yeah.
are the trials. And you barely got to know the man and you the original Ace Attorney games have done stuff like this before, but it's given a lot more like there's a little bit more like pomp and circumstance to it in the story. Here it feels like more of a roadblock for Naruhodo than anything, as opposed to feeling like, oh, this is a huge moment in the story. Just because you
Yeah.
yeah, I do agree. I don't care for how they handled Asogi's death in that boat case.
Yeah. Also, that was just the most I think out of the four cases, the boat case was the most convoluted, strange, unrelated series of odd coincidences that could have been pieced together into a semblance of meaning. It was weird. I feel like I was the most lost on that one because I just every single time they revealed something new, I was like, "What?
Hey, at
What?"
least it had an entire boat crew of stereotypical Russians.
That is true.
Like I know you love those Russian characters because you love yourself a stereotypical Russian.
I do. I love nothing more than a stereotypical Russian. I need ukropification of all Russians in media. I need them to just be ukropified.
I also do kind of appreciate that, especially in this boat case, but throughout the entire game, that a lot of Sherlock Holmes' dumbass theories are actual dumbass theories Sherlock Holmes has put forward in his original book series. Because Sherlock Holmes is kind of, when you actually get down to it, not a great written detective story. He's iconic character writing wise. There's some great stuff, but those detective answers get fucking wild.
There's a reason why I like Agatha Christie more than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
And I do appreciate that this series really does call out how stupid some of that stuff is, like these cases
Yeah.
do.
Like I'm gonna be so honest. I have read so much better Nancy Drew than Arthur Conan Doyle. Like on a percentile scale of like out of as much as I've read of either of those authors.
Well, that's because Nancy Drew wrote a lot of her stuff in response to some of the bullshit that came out of the Sherlock Holmes era of detective stories.
Carolyn Keene. Absolutely. You know the fun fact about the Nancy Drew stories?
Hmm.
Carolyn Keene is a pen name shared by multiple authors. Yeah. So the Nancy Drew books were not all written by the same person. A lot of them were, but there were multiple authors who worked on that series, which I think is interesting because the series retains an insane cohesiveness. Same thing with the Hardy Boys. Like they're insanely cohesive stories if you read like all the books through, and I did when I was a kid. Um, just thought I'd mention that.
No, no, that's fair. That's fair.
And Agatha Christie's got a leg up in my mind, partially because of her autobiographical writings about what hell she lived through with her archaeologist husband. Because Agatha Christie, she writes great novels. Like I love her novels, but also she just had a fascinating life, and she wrote a lot about her life, and her life was really funny. Whereas Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes, I'm gonna be
Look,
honest. I think the best portrayal of Sherlock Holmes, like in my opinion, right? And I'm definitely wrong here in terms of quality, but the one I enjoy the most, like dealing with, is definitely the Robert Downey Jr. movies.
I haven't watched those ones.
They're not great, but I feel like they really capture the energy of Holmes, like in
Look,
spirit.
I think it's important to remember that Holmes in the original Sherlock Holmes story is kind of a weirdo. Like
Yeah,
the entire first introduction to him is like Dr. Watson being like, "Is this guy okay?" Like
they're
he's a drug addict.
yeah,
He is a flat earther, and he's just kind of an all around
they're
odd dude.
there is a reason why Sherlock Holmes in a lot of modern media has been portrayed as being on the autism spectrum. And a lot of that is relating back to the way that Victorians described and treated people with like different developmental processes and different requirements for sort of productivity and learning and expressions of themselves. Um,
I know
which
you
is
don't.
interesting.
I know you don't care for Sherlock Holmes, but that's kind of the aspect I like about his character in this game. Is he's a moron, a dumbass, but
I
a lot of that is that he has incredibly scattered thinking, but a really good grasp at observation.
Which look, I get the whole incredibly scattered thinking. I like believe me, I fucking get it. What's the butterfly brain? I
Mm-hmm.
have butterfly brain too, you know? You say one thing and then, it's like one of those backward Wikipedia article searches where you just start clicking blue words that interest you. I get it. But oh boy, was it hard to watch this portrayal of anything close to that. Oh, and the dances did not help.
Look,
No.
I actually genuinely kind of like the character archetype that Holmes is kind of written to be because I've seen it in other media as well. I like the it's not quite yeah it's pretty much a flavor of crouching moron hidden badass, but
Hidden badass where? This is just crouching moron.
look, the game does make it clear that Sherlock Holmes is smart. He's just he's a weirdo. He's eccentric.
Eccentricity does not excuse idiocracy.
Look, I personally love the part where you're just randomly talking to someone and you notice him hanging off the coat hooks on the background.
Look, for someone who is trusted enough to be able to just say, this is my deduction, and have people believe you enough to the point where people get put in jail for that. All I'm saying is you should maybe spend an extra 15 or 20 minutes thinking over what you're saying before you say it and doom some poor innocent soul to Victorian prison.
In fairness, I'm pretty sure that's actually like that actually might be a critique of that. So like because they make it kind of clear in that first game at least that Gregson is the like
Yeah,
the actual detective.
Gregson. It should be Lestrade.
It makes it very clear that he's not good for defaulting for what Sherlock Holmes is saying a lot, and that he's doing this almost entirely out of money and fame. Like Holmes is smart. He should not be getting random Japanese guy who's an actual historical figure, by the way. I forget his
Yeah,
name, but um, he should not be getting him thrown in jail on his whims. The fact that the police are doing this is entirely corruption.
Sherlock Holmes is a consultant,
Yeah.
not a policeman. All he can do is present evidence
And like
that
if you're
still
going
needs to
into
be
it, if
verified.
you're going into it like, what are you noticing about this crime scene? Sherlock Holmes is fine. Like, oh,
Yeah.
we didn't catch that random detail that you caught. But like as soon as he starts throwing out his actual theories on who the killer is that are often incomplete, it fucks with everything. And the police are wrong for that in this game. And I think the game does make it clear they're wrong for that. And that's why
Yeah.
Naruhodo doesn't take like that's why you as the main character aren't supposed to take what he says at face value.
It's
I get
wild.
it. I get it. There's a level where this is just why. So I get why you don't like the character, but I do actually find his character kind of fascinating and I like how he's written. But I get why you don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um Lestrade was kind of in this game.
Yeah. Gina.
Yeah. I like Gina.
Gina's fun.
She's
She's
I
written to have like the thickest of like Cockney ass accents.
look,
In my head, knickknack, picture this. Picture everything she says in Eliza's accent before the doctor got a hold of her. Ah!
I Gina, like I did read some of these cases out loud like I do on stream just because that's a good way for me to concentrate sometimes and pace myself to paying attention to the story. And she was one of my favorite characters to read out loud. It's
I
such an
just
entertaining accent.
every time she started talking, I just heard Eliza Doolittle pre-transformation. Just so intensely, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I do like I'm not gonna sit here and say this is the strongest visual novel of all time. I was mostly like you'll notice I'm mostly interested to see how you engaged with the gameplay of this visual novel, whereas the story I went into not blind but kind of blind,
Yeah.
and I have my problems with it, like real problems with it.
Yeah, the gameplay wise, the further you get on, the better it is. Because if I consider like 4 and 5 separate from 1 through 3, that's almost tolerable, you know?
And 1 through 3 really are just tutorial.
Yeah,
It's a bit like it's that's again that's that
but
weird
it's a
weird ass
long
pacing.
tutorial. Oh, it's such a long tutorial section. God, it's like half the game.
See, I'm gonna give you a nice long break before I ever have you try the original Ace Attorney. I don't think I'll ever have you go through the entire original Ace Attorney series. I wasn't gonna have you go through the entire Great Ace Attorney series or duology. But I do want to get your like have you try out the original Ace Attorney once this is in the rear view mirror by quite a few hundred miles.
Well, you have to finish the second part of this first, so you've got
Yeah, I
time.
know. I thought I was done reading visual novels for a moment. I'm caught up on my visual novels right now, working on the damn Fate Stay Night video. The
Look,
fuck, Seki?
I'm just saying, if it's a separate game, it should be labeled as a separate game.
It was. It's a game collection.
Yeah, but a game collection is just one game in my
No.
library.
Yeah. It's like the Assassin's Creed launcher. I know you get that concept. The Assassin's Creed launcher that was proposed where you could just launch all the Assassin's Creed games out of.
Yeah, but that's not that doesn't exist yet.
It's going to. Look,
You know, I know it is. I know which one you're talking about. That's
like,
Project Infinity or whatever, but
if I ever wanted you to play Kingdom Hearts, I would probably give you one of the collections. But also,
look,
those collections are not one game. You would be spending upwards of 200 to 300 hours to finish that collection.
I just assumed that if they were in the same Steam listing, it was one game split into 2 parts.
I mean, it kind of was. I'm going to be honest
And
here. Like,
and
this,
you said do all the parts. So I did all the parts. I feel like you gave me so much shit about how long it was taking me to get done with this. And like I asked for extra time like a week and a half ago because I was like, I need a bit of extra time to finish this up. And I feel like you maybe understand a little bit more of why I needed that extra time now.
Yeah, I told you at least on 2 occasions you're playing Adventures Not Resolve, and I told you that there were 5 cases.
Bro, I didn't even know they had a different name. I just thought it was all the Great Ace Attorney. I didn't even pay attention to the fact that there were two different names.
You didn't notice when they had you go through a second lighter version of the tutorial?
No, I thought it was just a refresher.
Oh my god. By the way, you probably will need to refresh on this before you actually do the off the shelf on the second half, but you've played the game at this point. You can use the transcript and I won't be mad that time.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in awe. I thought the next visual novel we'd be doing might be Fate Stay Night or something, but no, it's going to be Great Ace Attorney too.
This is so funny to me. This is like me starting Fate Stay Night and thinking that I have to play through all three routes to finish the game.
Technically, that is all one game. Me splitting up you doing the 3 routes would be for your benefits. Also, because I wouldn't want to read all 3 routes back to back again. That is such a tiring experience. I feel like I was. That's for my video. We'll see you back here next time with whatever's coming up. This is like our first out of order off the shelf recorded in quite a while. This is
Yeah.
going up. This is going up in less than, or it's scheduled to go up in less than 13 hours. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
be edited in 13 hours.
Oh, it will be. I'm not tagging it though. That's gonna be on you.
I already gave you the thumbnail. I don't care.
That's fine. You just have to tag it. I'm not putting the tags in for this. Ugh.
I'll see y'all next time.
I feel like your level of defeat is the same as Peachy right now, who is currently sprawled on my floor.
Now, I went in here expecting to be defeated. I'm defeated for a very different reason than I was expecting.
Okay, but on the scale of hearing what you said and the two options being I could have just played through one case and assumed that was all I needed to do, and I played through 10 cases instead of 5. I feel like you got the better deal out of this.
Except I also said in the earlier part of this video that, if I had thought about it for a second or I knew how long some of these cases got, I would have just proposed making this a longer running series of one case at a time.
But yeah, I suppose final thoughts for me are the game gets better as you go on, but it's never what I would define as replayable or like good enough for me to be like, this is a good game. I would not say that about this personally, at least for these first 5 episodes. But it's not as bad once you get to 4 and 5 as it was in 1 and 2. Like once you get over the hump of like once you have all the tutorials down, it's just you playing through what I assume a normal one of these games feels like ish. And that's fine. Like there's more to do than Witch on the Holy Night, and I appreciate that I get to make choices and there are consequences for my actions. If I choose like the wrong choice or miss something important. Um, yeah. And the visuals were decent. I mean, the characters were certainly the standout.
Hey guys, well, I'll see you next time. I'll see you next time. Bye.